Hello, hello. Welcome to another episode of the Savvy Painter podcast. I'm your host, Antrice Wood. If you're new here, welcome. I am so glad that you found me. And if you've been listening for a while, welcome back. Savvy Painter is the podcast for artists who want practical, tactical tips to create a meaningful art practice that is fulfilling and supports you. So this is part of a new series of podcasts where I brought together a roundtable of artists from Growth Studio. What I did was I picked several topics I thought you might be interested in hearing about, and I asked Growth Studio members to come on the podcast for a deep dive discussion. Each episode is a standalone, so don't worry if you're coming in now, you do not need to listen to them in order. Today, I'm talking with Sabrina Sotaro, Alyssa Marquez, and Jess Fredick. In this episode, we're talking about what I call the experimental phase. If you're not sure exactly what I mean by that, don't worry, I got you. So I find it helpful to organize the phases or stages that we go through as artists. So real quick, we have the exploratory phase, which is what we're going to talk about in this episode, but it's a period of exploration, discovery, and play. And from there, we go into the production phase where we focus on an idea and create a body of work. So oftentimes the production phase comes directly from the exploratory phase. Maybe you're playing around with a lot of work and then you notice that you're super curious about this one piece and you kind of find this thread and you take that thread and create a body of work from it or a series of paintings from it. In that stage, I would say that you're in the production phase where you're focused on a specific body of work. And then next, we show the work. So that can be studio visits, art fairs, expositions, galleries, or showing your work online. In its simplest form, it's letting other people see the work somehow. From there, we go into selling it, whether we are actively selling the work ourselves or we are working with someone else like a gallery or a dealer to sell the work. And then finally, there is the rest phase where we recuperate, we recharge our batteries and let ourselves digest all of the things that came before so that we can connect the dots. And when we go back into the studio, we have this whole new view. So we go right back into the exploratory phase. And these phases are cyclical. A common question I get about them is, how long should I be in each phase? And my answer is, it really depends. I don't think there's a set time for any of these, and they are not generally equally divided. Meaning, it's not like you're going to have 3 months of the exploratory phase and then 3 months of production and then 3 months of showing and selling and then 3 months of rest, right? You might need, in certain times of your career, you might need 6 months of exploration, 5 weeks of production, 1 month of showing and selling, and then 2 months of rest. And then maybe the next round, maybe you just need 2 weeks of exploration, and then that's followed by a year of production. So you can see it really depends on you. It depends on your process and what you need at that time. But regardless, I find it helps a lot to understand and identify where you are at. The clarity that you get from naming where you are helps you to avoid overthinking and overwhelm. Neither of those things are helpful at any stage. They're just, ugh. So that's just to put this episode in context for you. In this episode, Sabrina, Jess, Alyssa, and I are going to talk about the whole exploratory stage. We're going to talk about what they do in this stage, what these artists do in this stage, how they play with techniques, how they balance play and exploration with a purpose, and how they create spontaneity and how these artists play with constraints so that they can avoid overwhelm and overthinking while they're in this playful discovery phase. Okay, let's start with some introductions. Sabrina, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, so I live in South Carolina, in York, in a rural area. I'm originally from Germany, though, but yeah, since several years I live there in a kind of small town, probably like a lot of people. And I paint mainly in gouache and watercolor. And I would say my work is more on the abstract side, for sure. Even though you could maybe always argue a little bit. There's also things in there that you can explore, but more on the abstract side.
Alyssa, how about you?
Yeah, I am in California, also in a rural area close to the town of Bishop. And we're just smack dab in the middle of the Sierras and the White Mountains. And I'm from the other side of the Sierra, in the foothills where gold was discovered. And my artwork, I'm in all sorts of different mediums right now. I'm working in oils and watercolors, mixed media, inks, wood, found objects, put it all together and make it abstract. And that's kind of my art.
Love it. Beautiful. And Jess.
I'm Jess Fredick, and I am a born and bred New Yorker. I'm currently living in Brooklyn. My work is primarily focused on animals and objects with an emphasis on like a line between figurative and sort of abstraction in the depictions of them. I'm sort of fascinated by the gesture and what we can know in a gaze about our subjects.
Beautiful. Love it. So the topic for this conversation, we're going to talk about the exploratory phase of your artwork. The way that I tend to think about how we create art is that there's a couple of phases of the art and of what the artists go through while they're creating the work. And that the first one is the exploratory phase. And that's kind of where we are playing around and discovering and doing all sorts of things, which we're about to talk about. So I won't go too detailed on it right now. But then once we've kind of played around and explored a little bit, then we go into, and I don't have like the best phrase for this, but I kind of talk about it as if it's like the production phase, where we might decide like, okay, so I've played around with this idea and I've found this thread that I want to pursue with this idea that I have. So now I'm going to do a series of work. And from there, we tend to go from the producing the work, creating a body of work, and then showing the work, and then selling the work. And then finally, another very important phase of the art process is the rest phase, is the pause phase, is where what I like to call like the percolation phase, where all of it sort of comes together and we recharge our batteries. But for this episode, what we're going to focus on is just the exploration and the play. So first question I have for y'all, I would love to hear from each of you. What exactly does it look like for you? Or what are some of the things that you do in your studio when you are exploring in your work? Jess, we can start with you.
I find the exploration stage like really messy because I feel like usually you have to start with just sort of I usually start with like almost like a meditation or a mindset to it, in that usually if I can't think of anything to draw, but I'm bored with what I'm drawing, I will draw sort of everything around me, from bottles to people to shoes, strings on a carpet, like whatever is laying around, just to see what will start to spark. And sometimes that can go on for a really long time. It can be a really frustrating beginning to things, but then all of a sudden, if I don't sort of critique it while I'm doing it, something will set me off onto a different path. That's usually how I'll find like a subject, or I'll start from a concept of like, why am I painting this? Right? Is a big part of my exploratory phase too, once I've sort of established my subject. But then there's also, I'll ask questions about the medium, like what happens if I mix this and this? How do I create motion or movement? Or how do I get a similar effect in ink that I'll get then in acrylic? So usually I'll start from either the technical side or the exploration of subject.
Nice. Yeah, fun. Very cool. Alyssa, how about you?
Yeah, it's interesting because, I mean, I'm a fairly new artist or early in my career. And I feel like I'm constantly in some sort of exploration stage because I have been trying so many different mediums. And I think just part of the exploratory is because I didn't have like an education in art. So every medium that I pick up is kind of just exploratory. So as I move along in my career, it's interesting to think about like when I've learned more about how certain mediums work, how the exploratory phase will change. And it might have to be more purposeful because right now it feels very just organic. I'm like, what is this? Like, let's try this out. But if I was to think about purposeful like exploration, honestly, a lot of it comes from like textures or shapes that I find out when I'm like hiking, when I'm out working and hiking, and I'll often like take things back to think like, I'm not quite sure, like, what can I do with this object? I'm not quite sure, but I like this shape. I like this texture. And so and sometimes I'll just bring it back and it'll sit there for a bit. And like a month later, I'll be like, oh, I know what to do with you. I'm going to shove you in some plaster over here. I don't, it's just like, it's very spontaneous and organic. And I guess I kind of like to leave these objects around or these ideas around so that I see them and then they kind of like come together when they need to. So it's very fun. I love the exploratory phase. It's great.
Yeah. Oh my gosh. Yeah. And I love this idea of, from both of you, just bringing in whatever's around you and just allowing your environment to take part in the creative process. Cool. Sabrina, how about you?
Yeah, I can relate to a lot of what also Alyssa said. And I'm also very early in my painting career and feel like every painting is exploratory. And I noticed that I actually, that is what draws me to painting so much, to the exploration of it. But when I think about, okay, when I'm just basically playing with something new, I notice that I look at it more in terms of experimentation. And the difference there for me is sometimes when there's too much variety, I can get overwhelmed and then I don't know what I'm really doing. And I really like when I'm experimenting to only do a little bit and to keep what I'm doing, but maybe switch up just one thing or another thing. It's almost like an experiment in the lab, right? Where you keep everything the same and you control for one single thing. And I noticed that is my type of exploration, and it's more of an experience to see. Oh, I wanna learn how this color, this new medium, how this works, and in order to do that, to not get frustrated and overwhelmed with too many variables, it really helps me to get in experimentation mode and then just try this one single thing and introduce it in what I'm doing. So yeah, that's more what I do when I'm in the exploratory phase or experimentation phase.
Yeah, I love it. And I think it's like this group that I have here right now. What I kind of love about it is that we've got different types of art, different types of medium, completely different thought processes. And I love that, I didn't realize you were so rural, Sabrina. But I know, Alyssa, I know because we could have been neighbors if I'd stayed in Mammoth. So I know the area that she lives in really well. And then Jess, smack dab in the middle of New York City, basically. So our environments, I think, couldn't be more different. And the levels of play, I think, it kind of feeds into that. When you're experimenting and when you're playing around, do you have a sense for when you want to take it further, or when you are just simply like in that, it reminds me of Nightmare Before Christmas, like, what's this? In that phase of just like absolute awe and just like, oh my gosh, I wonder what this is going to do. And what is this going to do? Anyone have any thoughts on that? I kind of want to open it up so that you guys can riff off of each other.
It's funny because I find one of the things that I really struggle with is getting to that place of play. And if I'm feeling only the curiosity about the medium or the subject or something, then I actually know that that's the moment that I need to continue doing exactly what I'm doing and not stop to think, maybe this will be a series, or maybe this will be, this. I have to let that is what creates the riff for me. And that's also for me, the hardest part of the exploratory phase is allowing myself to stay there in exploration without getting into like the what's next. And now I need to do 10 of these, or it's
right.
Sort of I need a finished piece, because so much of exploration is not having a finished piece and having things that you hate, things that you love as well, but being comfortable with, I've just wasted a lot of paint, or I feel like I've just wasted a lot of paint, or I've wasted a day feeling frustrated by it. And as much as it's this very fabulous sort of Zen place to be in playfulness with paint and ideas and animals and objects and all the things that sort of fill my head, it's also an incredibly frustrating place, because I naturally default to, where am I going with this?
What's the meaning of it? Yeah.
What's the meaning of it?
Yeah.
I have to, and I know that I have to stay out of that place in order to actually find the place that I'm going, if that makes sense.
Yeah, totally. And I'm wondering, like, when you are in that phase of just kind of playing around, what are some of the techniques or thoughts that you use to stay the course, to allow yourself to kind of be okay with this idea that, what I'm making isn't resolved. And who knows, maybe I'll come back to it much later, but for now I'm just playing and I'm going to just let it be whatever it is. So there's like that kind of desire with it. And then there's that wanting to make it mean something. So what are some of the ways that you keep yourself on track, if you have any?
That directed at me, or
Yeah, I make it easy for myself, knowing that these thoughts will come up. Oh, I wasted time and I wasted paper and paint, and so I make it really easy on myself and go small, and that helps me to stay in this. Okay, there's nothing to lose here. There's nothing to lose. It's not going to cost a lot of money. It's not a ton of time, and I can just try it out, and then I can try another one until maybe I see something happening, or until I'm getting bored with it, and then move on to something else, or let it sit. But allowing myself to know, that is a normal process. That is just what it is. Learning by doing, and making it really easy to not get frustrated with myself, or get thinking about it as a product, right? If I start really small, it helps me to not think about something, oh, this is a piece that I'm going to show or sell. I think that helps me to stay, just upfront, to stay on track, and not, as Jess said, right? It is so easy then to get frustrated, because often when you experiment, I mean, it doesn't really come out in a shape or form where it's like, oh, I'm this genius, perfect. It will, it is something that you move on to. But then I try to focus and think about, okay, what are the pieces that are working? What is there something in there that I want to keep taking to the next painting? And that's how I go through that, and then just see what comes with me along. And if after a while I notice, oh yeah, this is still with me, then I know I'm kind of onto something, or maybe, this is something I tried, but then I see myself not doing it for a while, and it might come back also to a later point. But this is a little bit how I approach and help myself to stay out of the frustration phase while exploring.
Nice. Alyssa, were you going to say something?
Yeah, I just, after Sabrina was talking about finding things within a piece of artwork that you like, that kind of really resonated with me, because I feel like that's how I deal with like making a bunch of bad art that doesn't look good, was nothing like I wanted to do, or just not happy with it. But I don't think I've had a single piece where there isn't something in there that I was like, oh, like that was cool. Like I really like that mark that I made, or that color combination, or
it's like dating.
But sometimes maybe you find something and you just don't like it.
No, you gotta try
not that
one. But so that's the fun part. That's the fun part of like, what's the one thing that I do like and that I can carry over to the next project, and just looking at it as like, it's just one more thing that I like got out there, and like I'm that much closer to making that thing, that I want to make, and just being happy that like that you spent that time putting whatever on paper or whatever art you're doing, just being happy that you like did that, even if it looks pretty bad.
Yeah. And I think, like one of the things for me that I really enjoy about the exploratory phase is not having any attachment to it. And I kind of like, I will play back and forth between, and it's a similar thing, but speed and quantity of being like, how fast can I do this? Or there's a couple things. One is, how fast can I do this? So can I do this in 15 minutes? Or can I do this, and it keeps me from getting too precious with whatever it is I'm doing. When I say something, okay, I'm going to see how many of these I can do in X amount of time, or, okay, this one usually that size, because like Sabrina, I will also go through these phases where I just like do these tiny little paintings, but then I'll find myself sometimes wanting to take it to another level and getting more detailed than I'm intending to. And so I think in those moments, it's kind of like these constraints that I put on it will start off being, okay, I'm going to do it small. So I do like a whole bunch of them, right? So I'm thinking quantity, just like get a whole bunch of them done, and see how many different ways can I say this idea. If I'm thinking about the exploratory phase in terms of an idea, she's like, how many different ways can I approach this? It's almost like, how many different ways can I sing that song? But then there's other times when I'm playing with, texture or something like that. And so then I think it's more of a quantity question for me. But yeah, I'm just kind of thinking like all the different ways that I'll put constraints on and or keep myself from getting into like Jess wanting to finish the painting or wanting to make it mean something, and just letting it be what it is. And I've got like sketchbooks just filled, like sometimes I'll flip through them and I'm like, that is really interesting. Mm-hmm. And I'm glad I didn't cover it up.
It's funny because I know that like if you work fast and you do a lot of them, yes, something shows up, and I can see that in a lot of drawings. But somehow for me in the exploratory phase, that as like the thing I need to do, like you need to make 20 of these. Yes, it does actually help, but it causes me such panic. It's just I don't know what else I was supposed to do here, and it kind of actually often will have the opposite result for me, that sometimes I have to let myself obsess, right? Like I have to just get all the little like details in there, or whatever it is, and it's such a balancing act. Like I'm listening to you guys, and you guys are so much nicer to yourself about this stage than I am. I feel like the thing that I have to learn in addition to working faster, right? Because that's the thing I've heard my entire, like, you need to make more output, like to find the idea is also just this ability to pause in exploration and be like, actually, you're obsessing, just take a break, walk outside, like it's, I mean...
But I mean, it doesn't, just because like one artist works, tends to work with speed, like, and I don't always work with speed. I mean, you guys have seen me paint. It's slow. It's glacier slow. But it's a really slow process, but then it's just like that. I think what it is I heard there was this guy that I used to love. Oh my gosh. Wow, I'm about to really date myself because Bush was president. So just kind of like go back to how long ago and what technology was like. But there's this guy, his name was Zay Frank. I mean, his name still is Zay Frank. But he had this video blog, like, and this was before YouTube existed. So him even doing this was crazy. And he would do these, he decided he was going to do it for every morning for a year. He made a video. So this is before YouTube, before like everything that we have right now. And it was much, much more difficult. And he did this, I still remember it. He did this one video where he just talked about like everything is opposite day, where he did everything kind of like backwards from how he normally did it. And then he talked about like how it impacts his creativity. And it stuck with me because I like to think about that, like how can we force ourselves to think differently, to get ourselves out of a rut that we don't even know that we're in, right? And to play and figure something else out like that. So I think that's part of the reason why, like, I'll put these bizarre constraints on myself where I'll just be like, okay, it's like 2-inch by 2-inch painting day. But I mean, that's what Sabrina does all the time. So or I'll like do something like open a jar, close your eyes and grab 3 tubes of paint. Now make a painting with those 3 colors that have, unlikely have anything to do with them other than they're in my jar. So obviously I picked them.
I love hearing these techniques. I just love it. I just think it's great because it's so important to the process. And
left-handed drawings or like whatever, or like, some of my favorite experimental techniques. I want to do this again. Actually, now that I'm thinking about it, I only did it a couple times. So I'm like, right this second, I was like, why have I only done? But regardless, I think what I did was I painted shadows with my left hand and lights with my right hand. So I know, right? I will make up these weird rules and then just like what happens. And so it probably came from like, doing drawings with left hand. And then somewhere out of that, I was like, oh, I wonder if I can paint that way. So I basically like would mix paints and I would mix like shadow colors. And it was sort of like a cross between, this idea of separating your shadow colors. If you think about the value scale, and if I just like cut out the middle part, so I have this distinction between what's light and dark. And so then on my palette, there's significantly dark colors and significantly light colors. I've got 2 paintbrushes, 1 in each hand, and I'm like painting, with both hands and just going like, this is madness, but it's also weirdly Frankenstein fun.
That's awesome.
I think whatever you can do to get yourself out of the head in putting pressure on you and the piece is helpful, because I feel like if I'm sitting there and painting and keeping my mind free of these, then I'm making progress. I know even if it feels like, well, what am I doing? Or it leads to a place. I found it leads to a place, and just trust it. But the worst for me is always when I start questioning, when I start putting pressure, then I get frustrated with myself. I get frustrated with the painting. And then what happens is I will resist going in the studio. I will resist making more. So I almost feel like you can't really go wrong. Whatever you do to keep yourself out of these thoughts is going to be helpful. And it's also really fun to do. And I find it for myself that I will see relatively quickly. It doesn't take too long to really see, oh yeah, this is going somewhere, even though I not necessarily was overthinking it. I can then tell, oh yeah, this is really going somewhere, and that is actually leading to something that works, and that it was a missing piece that I was struggling for so long, and now I found it actually. And yeah, through the experimental or exploratory phase, because I feel like for me that is really when you just notice, then all of a sudden it makes click, and then you can move on. But I cannot think myself into the click, so I need I need to, keep really my brain free from these things, from the frustrations of myself and pressure as much as I can. And then it tends to work itself out.
Yeah.
So, yeah.
Yeah, I had two thoughts that came up of things that I'm now realizing that I do. One of them is being like reusing things that I'm about to like throw out. And I'm like, okay, like what can I do to this artistically? Because I'm going to throw it out anyways and like make this into something, and it's not even something like that I want to really put anywhere. Maybe it will be, but then it kind of gives that freedom. And then the other thing I do, which I think this is just how I am, but I love like squatting when I do stuff. So I'll have stuff like strewn across the floor, and it like allows me to kind of like move in a different way instead of just like sitting at a table or something like that. And then I don't know, then so something about that mobility kind of like makes me feel more like I'm playing or something. And just also having like multiple mediums going on that I'm experimenting with. And I think my most favorite one where I was like drawing, but then also trying to do like linoleum block printing. And I somehow accidentally took like a rubbing of like fabric on the floor, and it got a really good impression. And then I was just running around the house, like making rubbings with the rolling pen of like, oh, this piece of wood. Oh, come here, kitty. Just like, going around the house, like doing all that. And so when you get in that mode where you're just like so excited to just see what's going to happen, like then that's a good sign. But those are just things that I think that's just how I am. But I guess those are techniques as well.
But no, they are. I mean, like it is. It's anything that gets us out of that, like the rut that we don't know that we're in, basically. Yeah. But Jess, you do a lot of experimentation. You really do. I mean, so like, just because, for example, I'm like, oh, okay, so I do these and I do these really fast. And you're thinking like, oh, well, compared to you guys, I'm really slow. That's just the way what I started thinking was like, oh, maybe I should like do like a slow-mo experimental phase and see what happens.
I mean, my experimentation is kind of funny because a lot of it is also just, again, I completely agree. Like so much of it is about changing the way I move, right? And remembering these things in the process, like all of the techniques, like switching hands or trying something else. But I also find, putting up multiple pieces of paper at the same time so I can move from one to the other. Yeah, I mean, a little ADD sometimes, just like tearing things apart and putting them back together without any real sort of structure, but I think also leaning into that idea that maybe I don't have structure and not sort of yelling at myself at the same time for that. A big part of how I end up allowing myself to experiment, right? Like I'll start with a concept and much like you, like, suddenly I'll have ink in one place and I'll have acrylic in another and I'll have some markers or, I'll just have to try all of the things together. And those are usually my best experiments, the happy accident that sort of, I don't know.
Yeah. And I wonder, like, when you're saying, it feels really ADD or whatever, but like, I mean, in this context, I wonder if that's just your intuition and your voice saying like, getting excited and being like, yeah, let's do this. Let's do this. Let's do this.
Yeah. I think that there's always like a critiquing voice that says, we have to focus or we have to make art a certain way. And I think certainly one of the things from Growth Studio that I've taken away is the fact that everyone has their own process and that you have to lean into that process in order to really play and be experimental. And so that's a lot of what I think I've been trying to do. I mean, yeah, I don't know. There's that moment where you're like, oh, I think I'm in love, and you find your thing, it's arts,
Yeah.
But depending on what I'm after, like some of my best experiments have been made with like tissue paper or things that may not last, The accident. The trick for me is finding the accident and then diving further into the same,
Yeah. What do you think? What are some insights you've had about your work from this phase?
From the exploratory phase?
Mm-hmm.
most of my exploratory phase is about trying to loosen up my work a little bit more and make it a little more playful, to not sort of, to be able to pause, right? That sometimes that there is beauty before we can see it. And experimenting allows you, knowing when to stop and walk away is part of what you teach yourself during the experimental stage, right? Or that's a big part of it for me. And then coming back and discovering the beauty of it later. Like, I think for my work, it's definitely, recently I've seen a lot of patterns in my work that I'm definitely ready to break, that most of which come from the habit of how I approach a canvas. And so a lot of my experimental questions are about, how can I do this differently? Can I start with, rather than a line, start with a color? If I start with a color, what does that do? If I work small versus big, if I work on the floor versus the kitchen table, like, I don't know. I mean, I'm in mid exploratory phase.
Mid exploration. I say, like, I haven't figured, like, I'm in the middle of it now.
Yeah, I mean,
yeah.
I see a lot of things I would like to change. I just don't know quite where they're landing to the next thing. I would like more spontaneity in my line.
Nice.
More of what I'm at. The unspoken part, if that makes sense.
The unspoken part. What do you mean?
I want to see the unspoken part of my line more, of my work more than the part that I've thought about, if that makes any sense. Like the part that every artist is unique from their handwriting, from the way in which they approach something. We all have the same materials, but when we get to a canvas, it all looks so much different, right? And allowing that is part of, I think, what we are discovering in the exploratory phase. It's like, what is it in my handwriting that distinguishes my work from your work? And I guess that's sort of what I'm after at the moment, in terms of, that's what I'm exploring to find out, what influence that will have on my greater body of work. I'm hoping will be really large. Like, yeah, you just sometimes got to turn it up.
Sabrina, you had something you wanted to add?
Yeah, when I think about the things that I have been experimenting and what it taught me specifically kind of in my work, and what excites me, I noticed that I started out more with watercolor, translucent watercolors. And when I started adding gouache to the pictures, I just wanted to try the medium out. And then I realized that I'm really excited about the contrast between translucency and opacity. And that I could not see with the way I painted before, because it wasn't in my work. And that is something that I definitely, realized only through the experimentation of it. It's almost like, oh, this was what I was looking for. I was missing this. Like a puzzle piece that it was really missing, that I could really tell afterwards, oh yeah, that it makes a big difference in how the vision what I have in my head and what comes out of the paper, I just really could not do before. And I think this is just one example, but it's definitely something that I noticed consciously, with my conscious mind, to really say, that was the gouache.
And I think too, if I think back on the work that you're doing now, there's a lot. So you're constraining your colors to a very, very limited palette. And I don't know if you're aware of this, but what I'm seeing is that your use of those colors is getting so much more sophisticated, because you're so intimate with them. Because it's like, I mean, I don't know how many of these you've done, but I'm thinking it's in the hundreds at this point.
Yeah, it's because it's funny too. That wasn't a conscious decision on my part. The conscious decision on my part was, it's too. I just noticed that I'm overwhelmed when I add too much, and I cannot. My learning process slows down, and I want to learn. I want to have a little bit of an aha moment. And I noticed if I only use a triad, and then I was experimenting with different ones, but then I got to this one, and for some reason, this triad that I'm using at the moment allowed me to free myself in other ways. So I whenever I start a new one, I'm thinking, am I ready? Nope, I'm not ready yet to move on to another, because you're right. it gave me a freedom and really exploration of what these three colors in combination can do, and that they look so different, than each other. And you almost wouldn't think that those were the same ones, and they have different way they behave with each other. That really helped me. So at some point I will be ready to move on, but for some reason, these three really work. And then because I do think for me it is important to have a good moment with the piece I made. I do want to set myself up for success up front, right? I mean, to make it just easier to have a learning point. So the constraints really, really work well with me. And
Alyssa, I'm curious what are some signals that you have that you might be ready to move on from? I don't know. I'm thinking from the exploratory phase, but maybe from the subject or the medium that you're exploring.
Yeah, I feel like maybe I had the opposite issue where I would be following so many different exploratory phases that I would be jumping from one thing to the next very quickly and not spending much time like exploring one thing. And I kind of realized that when I was showing some art to somebody to like get it hung up, and they were like, do you have any like multiples or like a series of stuff? And I was like, what? No, I just make random stuff.
I hate that question.
Huh?
I said, I hate that question. I do the same thing you do. Laura's like, do you have more of these? And I was like, no, that was one hit wonder.
So actually, that's like what I'm trying to do right now. I just finished up like a series of stuff in wood, and it's been fun. And like, I think I could take it even farther, but I also have the desire to kind of just do something totally different. And I think I'm just going to do both. I'm going to continue with that idea and also jump off on something new, because that is just how my brain works. It wants to do something new. It likes to have multiple options, which is, to go back to the previous question, just the main thing I've learned from exploration is like, I need to have a bunch of different options. And I used to think that was bad. Like I needed to just do one thing. And I'm like, no, that doesn't make any sense. I wouldn't enjoy art if I had to just do one thing. So I don't know. I don't know if I have any good insights on like cues to move on, because it just kind of is what my brain needs to do. So maybe I'll pass that one off.
Well, I mean, I don't know. What you sort of triggered in me in my thinking as I was listening to you is that in the same way that, as Jess described, we're all effectively using the same materials. We're using crushed pigments and something else, right?
Yeah.
And, whatever. We're all kind of using similar things. And yet our work is just infinitely different, right? And it's just such a beautiful expression of who we are as human beings to be able to create this work and to continue to evolve with it. And what I'm thinking is, within this idea of, okay, this is the exploratory phase, and the purpose of it is to play and to experiment and to have fun and to like just not have an agenda. I think in my mind, that is one of the most important things about the exploratory phase is to not have an agenda other than what's this, right? Or what about this? What about this? What about this? And the exploratory phase can be like you're describing, which is just like anything and everything, like the pine cones I pick up when I'm out hiking, and maybe I'll like use some pine needles as a paintbrush and see what that does, and all these different things. And so like this mass kind of like very broad, what about this? What about this? What about this? And then there's also on, the micro level of how far can I take these three colors? And how many different ways can I do this thing? And I don't know if you see it, Jess, but I kind of feel like your version of that is the line. Like your work to me is so Jess. right? There's no, like, I know instantly that's Jess. There's never a question in my mind. And throughout it all, the thread that goes through it is this, playfulness and this like push and pull of lines, overlapping lines, and how many, like in the same way, I feel like Sabrina is saying, like, how many different ways can I use these same three colors and make it interesting? And so far we're in the hundreds and there's still more, right? And I think with you, Jess, it's like, how many different ways can I construct these lines? Like how many, like, what's the limit to this? What are your thoughts on that?
I think that's one of the nicest things anyone's ever said to me. I'm blushing. Yes, I think that there is definitely, I'm not even really sure how to respond, to be honest. Yes, the push and pull of it is a really important element. Yeah, I don't know how to respond to that, to be honest.
Okay.
Yeah.
You don't have to have a response to it.
Which is such a nice thing to say.
I love it. Okay, here's the deep question of the episode.
Uh-oh.
Anyone feel free to chime in on this one, because sometimes we do. So there's the exploratory phase where we're just like, let's play, let's like see what I can do. And we've talked a little bit about, when do I know it's time to move on, or time to take this exploration and turn it into a series. I mean, for me, that's kind of like, I know it's time to move on when I'm not curious about it anymore, when I'm kind of just like, all right, got it. And then I think I know it's time to take that and move that into a series when I'm just like, I can't stop thinking about that. When I'm just like, oh, this is like, I could do this 100 times and still be curious about it. Then I know that, like, okay, there's the direction I'm going to go for now. Right. So big lead up to the deep question is like, how do you know, or what are some signals, or what are your thoughts? How do you know if you're using this exploratory phase as I'm in deep exploration, or it's my hideout?
Your hideout from creating a body of work, or your hideout from what?
Yeah, your hideout from either creating a body of work, or sometimes, like, I've seen people stay in the exploratory phase because they don't want to deal with showing their work. They're afraid to show it. So it's just like, I'm still working on it. I'm still working on it. Still working on it.
I would have said that is kind of a clue, entries, what you just said. I feel like when you're wanting to hide and not show, that could be a sign that you want to hide behind that exploratory phase a little bit. I mean, I agree too. I think I wouldn't want to create a body of work from something that does not excite me. I think the excitement has to be there. But yeah, I do think that the feeling of, okay, where are we? Is this something that and eventually I want to show my work, right? So I'm asking, where is this going? Does that hold up? Does it give me a meaning? Do I see a thread? And am I now ready to show that? And even, can I visualize a body of work coming from that? I think those are good clues, but I'm also, I'm curious what others think, because I'm not, I don't have the full answer to that either. Any thoughts?
Yeah,
it's okay if you don't. It's okay.
No, I mean, I'm a born and bred New Yorker. My thoughts have thoughts. First of all, I think that there are some artists who their whole art is the exploratory phase, and that's fine. They just like to play with the medium and with the idea, and never have the intention for a body of work or to show it or see it. And they just get their own sort of process high from just pushing things around. And more I start to build sort of, it's enviable to me, like that's where they're comfortable, right? Like, I like the fact that they're like, nope, this is the kind of art I do. I pour paint, you drop things on things, and that's my art. And they're quite happy to show it. Like, I don't think we're ever 100% ready to show our work. That there's always a question about, is it enough? Is this good enough? especially, in the exploratory phase, it creates a little bit of a confidence gap. But then a big part of making art is sharing it and showing it and transferring the emotion that you have depicted to another person and letting them have an experience with it. And I think that that's a very valuable part of what we do or why we do it. How do I know when that moment comes? It kind of sneaks up on me. It's sort of like I was saying earlier. I think making art is a bit like falling in love. Like all of a sudden you're like, I don't know why I like this person so much. It's all of a sudden like there's something in your surface. There's something that you have expressed or that I have expressed that I'm suddenly like, oh my God, I don't know where that came from. And I almost don't recognize it as mine, but I like it, and it's, I don't know why I like it yet. And if I can find that and it lasts in my work, then I'm okay to show it. Otherwise, it's going in the drawer, it's being dumped in the shower, it's disappearing, it's something is happening. But there are certain paintings that all of a sudden I'm like, who is that? Like, and I feel like I'm, like it makes you kind of blush with excitement. Like, I don't know how to explain it. And that inexplicable thing is what I'm exploring for, if that makes sense.
Yeah. Oh, totally. I mean, like, was it Georgia O'Keeffe who said I paint because I can't express in words what I can express in color or something along those lines?
Yeah. Something like that.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so it makes sense to me when we can't totally articulate it because it's a different language.
Yeah. I don't think we're supposed to, but I think stumbling on it is the moment where it's time to make a series or it's time to push it to the next question. It's either, or, conversely, I think sometimes I just have to stop when I'm either obsessive or crying, like just time to move on. Am I obsessing or am I crying? Like, time to just do the next thing.
One or the other.
It's either love, tears, or obsession.
Tears of joy, tears of happiness. I mean, I don't know.
It could be a million things. But.
Yeah.
The only sign that I could think of that maybe you're hiding out in the exploratory phase, maybe is like if you find yourself falling back on, whenever anybody sees your art or wants to see it or you show it to them in whatever way, and you're like, oh, but this is just practice, or like, because you kind of can fall back on that, like, oh, I'm just exploring or I'm just experimenting. And maybe you find yourself saying that to a lot of people. And like, it's scary to think about showing a piece where you did your best and you can't be like, oh, it was just, I was just messing around. I was like, no, I like that. That's everything in that painting. I put everything I know how to do. So maybe, I don't know, that could be a sign. Like if you're,
I think it is. I think that's a really good one. That's a really good one.
If that's your fallback, like, and you see it.
Oh, this one, it's nothing.
Yeah, instead of being like, yeah, I spent a lot of time on that, or what, I don't know, something like that.
Yeah.
I think it's also sometimes in the exploratory phase, I do feel like sometimes we are blind to it, and showing it is how we discover what it is that we're looking at. But yeah, I think it's exactly we tend to be like, oh no. That one. Yeah. But I completely understand and agree with what you're saying. It's very accurate.
So let me ask you this. So the question is, in your process of exploration and kind of playing around, how has being in Grow Studio helped you with that? Or has it?
Make 100 of these. That's a good clue. That has helped me really with the permission. Oh, especially since we talked about earlier, right? When you're exploring, you're feeling maybe I'm wasting time and I'm wasting pains. And showing it to somebody and it can really help giving that little bit of permission that you might need to go full in and explore it. So that certainly helped me a lot to say, oh, I'm allowed to make 100 of these little things. Yeah, and I mean, it would be nice if I could give myself the permission, and I'm working towards that. But sometimes it's just not how it works. And then other people that understand what creating feels like can really help. And it's not about saying this is the most beautiful thing you just made, but just giving you enough permission to, yeah, this is worth exploring. That helped me a lot.
Yeah, I think knowing or learning, understanding that exploration can be or is like a phase where you're just doing that and you're not trying to do everything all at once. Because I was having situations where just small little, art galleries or hotels or whatever, they're like last minute or like, oh, in the next couple weeks, like we have room for art. And you're like, oh, I should show art. Like I'm just starting. I should get stuff out there. But then I would drop everything to like try to frame a bunch of stuff that like kind of was just hodgepodge together. And then after being in Growth Studio, I was like, yeah, like those shows are going to come around again. Like I don't need to drop everything. Like this is the phase that I'm in, whether it was exploratory or whatever. Like I don't have to drop everything, and I can just know when it's going to be next year if I actually want to show stuff. So that was helpful. And then I really loved, just learning about all the techniques that we can use to explore, because it wasn't really how my brain was thinking about like exploration, but like drawing with your left hand was so fun. I really loved that so much. And just then seeing what everybody else is doing and what they're exploring with and what they're struggling with or having success with, just like regularly seeing people doing the same thing. It's just like gets you inspired to do it yourself, or you branch off on some things like, oh, they did that, but like I could try this, like something similar, different, or so it's been very helpful.
Yeah, I love that, because I have that too. When I watch you guys, sometimes I'm like, that makes me think of XYZ and I'm going to try that. So even, it's having that ability to see what other people are just like playing with gets you.
I loved your description of your profile on your Instagram, like what you did with the arms and the negative space. And I don't know, that was really cool to see too. So
yeah. And it's fun to play. How about you, Jess?
I think Growth Studio is a really good place to be uncomfortable. To what Alyssa was saying about the exploration stage and showing it and all of these things, like Growth Studio is a really important space to be able to be like, hey, I have no idea, but here I am. And to be with a bunch of creative people and you as are like to guide it is sort of an amazing way to be able to take the next step when you're stuck, and the fact that it's there like every week where you can just sort of like, send an email and have people look at a painting. I find it really invaluable to the process because listening to, to agree with what you both said about, other people and the ideas that are spawned but even just for me, sometimes even just knowing when to stop, right. And knowing when it's time to take it to the next place. But I think it's a good place to show up. I feel like when you sort of don't have the answer and be uncomfortable with not having the answer and looking around like sort of a proverbial room full of people sort of going, and just all nodding at you like, oh, we've all been there. And just also just to have the sort of like, I mean, mostly I just think it's an unusual space in that respect, right? Like where people are just incredibly honest about both succeeding and failing on surfaces where, I'll post things to Growth Studio that'll be like, I mean, don't take this the wrong way, but I wouldn't show them to anyone else. Like I just wouldn't. It's just not. Mm-hmm. So it's nice. It's nice to have that kind of place.
Beautiful. You guys are amazing. Thank you so much, Jess, Alyssa, Sabrina. Thank you so much for being on the podcast. You are phenomenal.
Thanks, Andrew.
Thank you.
Thank you.
A big thank you to all three of you for giving your time and experiences so freely with other artists. I hope you enjoyed getting to know Alyssa, Jess, and Sabrina and having this insight into their painting process. There's a lot of nuggets that they shared with you that you can take into your studio and start practicing today. If you are ready to reconnect with the playful side of your art and paint with purpose and freedom, and you want to do it with the help and support of an amazing group of artists, join us in Growth Studio. Just go to savvypainter.com/join or find the link in the show notes. I would love to see you there. Until next week, this is Ann Treeswood with the Savvy Painter Podcast. Talk soon. If you want to take what you are learning here on the Savvy Painter Podcast even further, join us in Growth Studio. Growth Studio is a unique community of artists. We meet multiple times a week for live coaching, critiques, and demos. Just go to savvypainter.com/join.